I was 22 years old, attending what should have been a raucous Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house, a place now steeped in a melancholic history since his tragic death from a heroin overdose in 2013. Before that devastating year, Nick, a true aficionado of the macabre, would orchestrate legendary Halloween gatherings at his family's sprawling Victorian home. His parents, a pair of social butterflies, routinely absented themselves, jetting off to New York each October to grace their own circle's elaborate costume ball. Nick's passion for Halloween bordered on obsession. Every conceivable surface of the house, from the dusty chandeliers to the creaking floorboards, would be draped, hung, and populated with truly horrifying props. Gory dismembered limbs, leering skeletal figures, and cobwebs so thick they felt like tangible barriers, all meticulously curated and, we suspected, extravagantly financed. He even went to the elaborate lengths of constructing makeshift walls from giant sheets of cardboard, adorned with peeling, sinister-looking wallpapers, transforming the familiar layout into a disorienting, haunted maze. Given the age and inclinations of the attendees, these parties were usually a swirling vortex of youthful indiscretions. However, to maintain a PG-13 rating for this recounting, I'll gloss over the predictable haze of weed smoke, the clinking symphony of beer bottles, the occasional whispered promises fueled by LSD, and the inevitable clandestine couplings. Instead, I'll steer directly into the chilling heart of the evening, the moment when the festive atmosphere curdled into genuine terror. I'll readily admit our judgment was clouded that night. None of us were operating on pure sobriety. Anyone who had ever crossed the threshold of Nick's Halloween extravaganzas knew the unspoken rituals. On this particular evening, the inner sanctum of Nick's upstairs bedroom had become our temporary refuge. Me, Nick, and a small coterie of our closest friends, the perpetually grinning Vinnie G, the quiet and watchful Joey, and the ever-sarcastic Q, were huddled together, the air thick with the sweet, pungent aroma of a shared bong. The low hum of conversation and the distant throb of the party music downstairs were abruptly shattered by two distinct sounds. Steady, loud bangs that resonated through the floorboards beneath us. A primal jolt of unease shot through the room. Nick, his usual laid-back demeanor instantly dissolving into a clumsy panic, scrambled to his feet and fumbled with the doorknob, desperate to see what had transpired. The sounds that followed sent a wave of icy dread washing over us. The cheerful shrieks and drunken laughter that had characterized the party were gone, replaced by a cacophony of raw, unadulterated screaming. It wasn't the playful terror of a haunted house. This was primal fear, the desperate cries of both male and female voices. What struck me with particular clarity, even through the drug-induced haze, was the sheer volume. It sounded as if a multitude of people downstairs were screaming for their very lives. A chorus of voices erupted in the bedroom, urging Nick to retreat. "Nick, get back in here, shut the door!" Even in our altered states, a chilling consensus formed. Something profoundly wrong was unfolding below. Nick, his face pale and eyes wide with a dawning horror, stumbled back into the room and slammed the door shut, his hand instinctively twisting the lock with a decisive click. He turned to face us, and the expression etched on his features was one I'd never witnessed before. A stark tableau of someone who had just glimpsed unspeakable violence. "What did you see? What's going on?" The questions tumbled out of our mouths. In a frantic, overlapping torrent, Nick's response was immediate and urgent. "Hide," he hissed, his voice trembling. "Just hide, before anything else." We didn't need further explanation. A shared, unspoken understanding permeated the room. From that moment forward, questions ceased. Instinct took over. Nick, his movements now swift and purposeful, flicked off the overhead light, plunging the room into near darkness. He scrambled into the cramped walk-in closet, pulling the hesitant Joey in after him. I dove under Nick's cluttered bed, the dust motes dancing and the faint light filtering from the hallway, Q right behind me. Vinnie G, ever resourceful, squeezed himself into a large lidded storage box in the corner. The raucous party music downstairs abruptly cut off, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. This silence was soon shattered by the guttural roar of a grown man's voice bellowing at everyone to shut up. A single terrified shriek pierced the tense air, the unmistakable sound of a young girl's shock and fear. This was followed by another sharp bang, and then nothing. An even more profound and terrifying silence descended upon the house. The man's voice erupted again, shouting at the unseen crowd, but his words were muffled, distorted by distance, and the adrenaline pounding in my ears. I certainly couldn't decipher his exact threats or demands, and to this day I couldn't recall a single coherent phrase. Then we heard other voices joining the fray, gruff, male, and undeniably hostile. By now a grim realization solidified. There were at least 3 intruders in the house, their presence a brutal violation of what should have been a safe haven. But for all we knew, lurking in the shadows, there could have been more. The distinct sound of heavy boots thudding on the wooden stairs sent a fresh wave of panic through our hiding places. The stomping grew closer, moving halfway down the hall and then stopped directly outside the bedroom door. We held our breath, every muscle in our bodies coiled tight. The doorknob rattled, a small, metallic sound that echoed loudly in the suffocating silence. When the intruder realized the door was locked, the assault began. A series of violent thuds reverberated through the frame as someone, undoubtedly using their shoulder, rammed against the solid wood. After a few jarring impacts, the sickening sound of splintering wood filled the air, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire as shots were likely aimed at the lock mechanism. The door shuddered violently, then swung inward with a groan. Simultaneously, a fresh wave of cries erupted from downstairs, a desperate chorus of pain and terror triggered by the gunshots. This was abruptly followed by another chilling silence, punctuated by a single muffled gunshot. Under the bed, my heart hammered against my ribs. Me and Nick, though separated by the thin wooden frame, both instinctively clamped our hands over our mouths, desperate to stifle the sound of our ragged breathing. Through the gap between the floor and the bottom of the bed, I watched in petrified stillness as a pair of black boots, the frayed edges of dark denim jeans overlapping their tops, moved with a chilling deliberation towards the closet. The closet door creaked open. From my vantage point, I couldn't see inside, but Nick's muffled pleas reached my ears. He was begging the intruder not to kill him, his voice thick with terror, offering a generous amount of money if they would just leave. In a desperate attempt to reason with them, Nick identified himself as the homeowner. That was when a harsh, commanding voice ordered him downstairs. The rest of us remained frozen in our hiding places, our bodies tense with fear. Apparently, Joey had somehow managed to remain undetected in the closet with Nick. We stayed huddled under the bed, trembling and consumed by a paralyzing dread. A near-total silence descended from downstairs, broken only by the low murmur of Nick's voice as he spoke with the intruders. Whatever was being said was too quiet, too indistinct for us to decipher. Every second stretched into an eternity, each tick of some imaginary clock amplifying our fear. It felt like an agonizing 20 minutes before the distinct slam of the front door reverberated through the house. A moment later, Nick came running back upstairs, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and lingering horror. "They're gone," he whispered, the words barely audible. But the true horror of that night wasn't fully revealed until I cautiously descended the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. Stepping back into the familiar yet now irrevocably tainted living room, I was confronted with a scene that would forever be seared into my memory. 2 bodies lay sprawled lifelessly on the floor, their stillness a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. Holes marred their heads, dark crimson blood pooling around them, staining the once festive decorations. Jen and Robbie, 2 good friends, 2 vibrant lives extinguished in an instant. 2 faces I would continue to see in my nightmares. I'll spare you the gruesome details of what transpired when the police finally arrived, the sterile efficiency of their investigation, a stark contrast to the raw emotion that still clung to the air. Despite the overwhelming aroma of marijuana that permeated the house, a testament to the earlier, more innocent phase of the party, the police were far more concerned with identifying the masked perpetrators who had brutally murdered 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nick, In his shaken recounting, informed the four of us who had been huddled in his room that there had been 4 intruders in total. All of them were clad in identical disguises, fedoras pulled low over their faces, expressionless vendetta masks, dark coats and gloves. Their demands were chillingly specific, $100,000 in cash. When Nick, understandably, couldn't produce such a sum they demanded, he filled their empty sack with his most valued possessions. Adding to the terror, all of the partygoers who had been held hostage downstairs were forced to throw their wallets and any valuables they possessed into the sack, under the threat of being shot. The aftermath of that horrific Halloween night cast a long dark shadow over Nick's life. He spiraled into a deep depression, the weight of survivor's guilt and the trauma of what he had witnessed proving too heavy to bear. He turned to alcohol, the once social drinker becoming a full-blown alcoholic. His studies, once a priority, were abandoned as he stopped showing up to classes and ultimately dropped out of school. The descent continued into the dangerous world of heavier drugs, methamphetamines, and finally, the heroin that would ultimately claim his life. I had only one truly meaningful conversation with Nick in the months following the incident, a raw and heartbreaking exchange where the carefully constructed facade he often wore crumbled away. He sat before me, tears streaming down his face, a glass pipe clutched in his trembling hand, and confessed the constant, agonizing pain he lived with, the crushing knowledge that he believed he had caused the deaths of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, less than a year after the night that shattered all of our lives. My own relationship with Halloween was forever altered. The innocent joy and playful scares were now inextricably linked to the memory of that night. For years I avoided any celebration, the festive decorations serving as a painful reminder of loss and terror. It was my first Halloween living in my own small corner house, a modest dwelling with a basement but no upstairs, a place my parents had generously helped me purchase. The clock on the living room wall ticked past 11 o'clock at night. I was trying to lose myself in the flickering images of a scary movie marathon on TV, a solitary attempt to embrace the holiday in my own way, when a sharp knock echoed from the front door. A flicker of annoyance mixed with a prickle of unease ran through me. Who could possibly be at the door at this late hour? Surely all the trick-or-treaters had long since retired for the night, their pillowcases bulging with sugary loot. A fleeting thought suggested a late-night Halloween prankster, a mischievous teenager indulging in a ding-dong ditch. I decided to wait a moment, hoping they would simply disappear. After a brief pause, I glanced through the living room window. Towards the porch, it was empty. Yup, definitely ding-dong ditches. I settled back onto the couch, not giving it a second thought when another, more insistent series of knocks rattled the front door. "Kid lost," I yelled out, my voice tinged with irritation. I was in no mood for juvenile games. My pronouncements were met with silence, followed by a more aggressive assault on the door. Not just polite knocks now, but forceful pounding. Annoyance flared into genuine anger. I leapt up from the couch, swung the door open with more force than necessary, and found myself staring at an empty porch once again. Frustration mounting, I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside, scanning the surrounding bushes for any sign of the elusive pranksters, but there was no one. Not lurking behind the overgrown hydrangeas, not crouched behind my parked car, not even across the quiet street. I was done playing this ridiculous game. Refusing to further indulge their childish amusement, I retreated back inside, double-locking the front door for good measure. A residual unease lingered, so I also locked my bedroom door, a small, perhaps irrational act to feel a little safer in my solitude. Even through the muted sounds of the television, I could still hear the persistent thumping on my front door. The stupid kids were relentless. I was teetering on the edge of calling the police, but the image of my house being plastered with eggs or draped in toilet paper held me back. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long duration, stretching well past half an hour. I started to wonder if these weren't just bored teenagers. Maybe they were filming some kind of ridiculous prank video for YouTube, desperate for a reaction, but I was determined not to give them the satisfaction. At some point, the exhaustion of the day finally caught up with me, and I drifted off to sleep with the television still murmuring in the background. I was jolted awake sometime later by the unmistakable sound of knocking, Groggily, I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 2 in the fucking morning. How could those kids still be at it, I thought, a wave of disbelief washing over. I reached for the remote, silencing the television, and sat up in bed, straining my ears. For a few heart-stopping moments, a chilling realization dawned. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was at my bedroom door. Surge of adrenaline flooded my system. I threw back the covers and scrambled out of bed, my eyes darting around the dimly lit room like a cornered animal, desperately searching for anything that could serve as a makeshift weapon. They knew I was awake now. I could hear the faint jiggling of the doorknob, followed by the low thuds of someone attempting to force the door open. These weren't any kids playing a silly prank. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. By some desperate miracle, a fragmented idea sparked in my mind. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass born out of sheer panic, but it was the only thing I could think of. I fumbled for the receiver to my small speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, and quickly navigated to the YouTube app. My fingers flew across the screen, typing in 45 gunshot sound effect. With trembling hands, I turned the volume up high and pressed play. The sharp, explosive sound of a gunshot ripped through the quiet of my bedroom, echoing off the walls. It sounded jarringly real. I quickly paused the video after the first shot and yelled through the closed door, my voice shaking slightly, "That was a warning shot. Leave now, or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And against all odds, it worked. I heard the distinct sound of 2 pairs of footsteps pounding across my wooden floors, moving rapidly away from my bedroom door and towards the front of the house. I waited a tense moment, listening intently before cautiously opening my bedroom door and peeking out into the hallway. They were gone, but the front door stood wide open, a silent testament to their hasty retreat. I quickly rushed downstairs, slammed the front door shut, and fumbled for my phone, my fingers still trembling as I dialed 911. And that, thankfully, is where that particular terrifying Halloween night finally ended for me. So, no, I was never really a big Halloween person. The magic of the holiday had always felt somewhat elusive, mostly because I grew up a bit of a loner, without many close friends. Once I passed the socially acceptable age of 10, I couldn't exactly use the going with my mom excuse anymore, and it wasn't like I had a gaggle of buddies to roam the neighborhood. With this particular Halloween, I was 14 years old. I did have a little sister, only 8 at the time, so my mom, ever the devoted parent, bundled her up and headed out for an evening of trick-or-treating. My one really good friend, Steve, already had plans with his family, and I didn't want to impose. So it seemed like another year where I'd be sitting on the sidelines while the rest of the world indulged in sugary delights. My mom and sister left around 6 o'clock, about an hour after she got home from her long workday. She told me to expect them back around 9, so I settled onto the couch in the living room, flipping through channels until I landed on AMC's annual Scary Movie Marathon. Occasionally the doorbell would ring, and I dutifully opened the door to dispense candy to the costumed hordes of excited children. It was during one of these candy-dispensing interludes that the kitchen phone began to ring, its shrill tone cutting through the eerie soundtrack of the movie I was half watching. I remember the ringer was set so loud it actually made me jump. I picked up the receiver, expecting to hear a cheerful trick or treat or a parent's polite thanks. Instead, the other end remained stubbornly silent, save for a faint rustling sound, a bit of muffled fumbling, the kind of indistinct background noises you'd expect when someone is simply holding a phone. "Hello," I repeated, my voice a little louder this time. I think I said hello at least 5 times, each unanswered call amplifying a growing sense of unease before the person on the other end abruptly hung up. A wave of annoyance washed over me. It had to be some neighborhood kid pulling a stupid Halloween prank call. What else could it be? I shrugged it off and went back to the living room. That worked well enough for the next few minutes of watching TV and occasionally answering the door. But then the kitchen phone rang again. The same unknown number flashed on the caller ID. Curiosity, mixed with a touch of lingering irritation, got the better of me. I picked it up once more. This time, instead of silence, I could hear a very faint, almost imperceptible breathing on the other end. A chill snaked down my spine.